Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. In her first public remarks since Charlie Kirk's killing, his widow vows his legacy will never die and calls her grief a battle cry. Suspect Tyler Robinson, arrested after a 33-hour manhunt, faces charges including aggravated murder and obstruction of justice. Medical staff say airstrikes across Gaza City have left more than 30 people dead, including children, as Israel intensifies its offensives and urges evacuations. The military says Hamas uses high-rise buildings for surveillance, while hundreds of thousands remain in the city amid shortages and continued strikes. Madrid calls in Israel's acting ambassador after Netanyahu's office accuses Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez of making a genocidal threat. Spain's foreign minister categorically rejects the remarks, escalating a diplomatic tit-for-tat over Madrid's moves to pressure Israel on the Gaza war. Poland boosts defence as tensions with Russia grow, with more than 20,000 civilians signing up for training in 2025. The government has raised military spending to 4.7% of GDP, the highest in NATO, as the army expands to over 216,000 personnel. President Ramchandra Pordel calls fresh polls after deadly protests forced Prime Minister Oli to resign and pave the way for Nepal's first female leader. Former Chief Justice Chunshila Karki is appointed interim Prime Minister as Gen Z anti-graft demonstrations shake Nepal's political order. An ethnic armed group says a junta warplane hit 2 schools in Rakhine, Myanmar, killing teenagers as they slept and wounding 22 others. UNICEF condemns the strike as a brutal attack on children amid intensifying clashes between the army and the Arakan army. Islamist fighters ambush an army convoy in South Waziristan, Pakistan, triggering a firefight that leaves 12 soldiers and 13 fighters dead. The attack occurred in the remote Badar region near the Afghan border, a long-standing flashpoint for violence. The World Bank's investment arm signs an agreement to fund gas capture projects and develop facilities at Iraq's main port of Qasr. Iraq's state news agency confirmed the $500 million investment with Basra Gas Company, though further details were not released. Now, we start this hour with some breaking news. US President Donald Trump has stated that he is prepared to impose major sanctions on Russia once all NATO members agree and begin similar actions. Trump has criticised NATO's involvement and commitment to winning the Russia-Ukraine war, saying it has been, quote, far less than 100%. This has come through Truth Social. Trump has emphasized that major sanctions on Russia would include stopping oil purchases by all NATO countries. He also mentioned that tariffs on China, ranging from 50% to 100%, could be fully lifted after the war between Russia and Ukraine ends. He's also called it a potential aid to ending the conflict. We are now joined by 2 guests to discuss this breaking news further. We're joined by Andrew Latham, who is a professor of international relations. He joins us live from Minnesota. And we're also joined by David K. Johnson, who is an American author, professor of criminal justice, journalism, law and political science at Rochester Institute of Technology, and he joins us live from New York. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us here on the program. Andrew, I want to start with you. Donald Trump's tariff policy, he is seeking for NATO countries to impose these tariffs on countries who buy Russian oil. What are your thoughts on the prospects of that actually happening?
Short term, they're probably quite low. Europe is simply dependent, especially certain parts of Europe, influential parts, I'm talking about Germany here, simply dependent on Russian oil and gas. Can they wean themselves off that dependence over the medium to long term? Perhaps. But they've shown very little interest, a little more recently to be sure, but over the course of this conflict, very little interest in doing this and very little capability of doing this. So I think, and we have to see what President Trump will be talking about tomorrow or the day after. You know, it wasn't that long ago he was talking about, in very favorable terms about President Putin and coming to some kind of ceasefire agreement, et cetera, et cetera. And now the carrots seem to have gone away and the stick seems to have come out. But that might not last very long. But to answer your question directly, I just don't see India weaning itself off Russian oil. I don't see China doing it. I don't see the United States weaning itself off certain other products that come from Russia. And I certainly don't see Europe in the short to medium term being able to wean itself off dependence on Russian oil and gas, no matter what President Trump might say.
David, I wanted to bring you in next. Donald Trump's statements here, how do you make of that command from the US president asking for 50% to 100% tariffs to be imposed on countries buying Russian oil by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization?
Well, Donald, whom I've covered and known for 37 years, believes he is an all-powerful, magically and powerful dictator. Under the American Constitution, he has no authority to impose these tariffs. One of the reasons governments have not been signing with him, saying we've reached an agreement and various other things, but not actually signing, is because the Congress of the United States is solely in control of taxes and duties and imposts, and tariffs fall under that. They are ultimately, in economic effect, a national retail sales tax on the imported goods and a national retail sales tax on competing domestic goods, because tariffs allow domestic manufacturers to raise prices to almost the level of the tariffed imported good. And so Donald, says that, and, he's claimed that world leaders have come to him and said, oh, Mr. Trump, thank you for showing us the error of your ways. And it's all just delusional.
Andrew, I want to come back to you just briefly before we move on. Why has Donald Trump changed his tune here? And why do you think, is he being serious this time? We saw prior to his meet with Putin in Alaska, he had a ticking time clock for that. However, given the circumstances currently, do you think that he is willing to go forward with further sanctions on Moscow?
I think he's willing to try, and he's certainly willing to bluster and bloviate, but the Supreme Court will be hearing this tariff case pretty soon, I think. And it's quite clear, as my colleague just pointed out, that that the U.S. president doesn't have the authority to levy these tariffs. It's simply beyond his constitutional powers. And so once that kicks in, maybe that's why he's moving quickly now to make these noises, because that stick is about to disappear, I think. Secondly, Donald Trump does change his tune and his tone quite regularly. His relationship with Prime Minister Modi, for example, and India more broadly, has gone from basket case language to they're our best friends again language. So I think things are not going well domestically or geopolitically for President Trump, and he's looking for a win. I'm not going to speculate on his Nobel Peace Prize fetish, but he's definitely looking for a win, and the only way forward he sees, the only way to achieving that win with respect to Russia-Ukraine is to pull out an even bigger stick with respect to President Putin. I just don't think it's going to work, because the stakes in that conflict for both Ukraine and Russia are pretty close to existential. Certainly on the Ukrainian side, they're existential, and they're existential on the Russian side as well. And meaningless, empty gestures coming from the Oval Office are not going to change the approach to peace of either President Zelensky or President Putin.
Do stay with us. Thank you for your insight there. We have some further news coming out of the United States, where Kaja Kallas has cautioned against discussions involving potential territorial concessions by Ukraine, calling such talks a trap by Russia. In an interview, Kallas has responded to recent German polling that shows public support for Ukraine is ceding territory in pursuit of peace. She has argued that entertaining such proposals aligns with Russian negotiation tactics. According to Kallas, Russia's tactic unfolds in 3 stages. First, Russia demands territory it has never previously controlled. Second, it issues ultimatums and threats. And then third, it encourages voices in the West to advocate for concessions, ultimately legitimizing those demands. This comes after Russian President Vladimir Putin signed accession treaties formalizing Russia's control over 4 occupied regions in Ukraine, those being Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporozhye, despite only partial military control in those areas. Thus, in the interview, the EU foreign policy chief has emphasized the need for closer cooperation between Europe and the United States in countering Russia. Andrew Latham joins us once again. Andrew, these 4 territories are central to these negotiations. We have seen even some of the public of Ukraine's closest allies now favouring ceding territory to Moscow in order to get a peace deal. Territory, of course, a highly contentious topic. How do you see this budging, if at all, on the diplomatic front?
I think the European public, if not the European leadership, is coming to its senses here. Ukraine is not going to win this war. It's not going to recapture the territories that Russia currently occupies, certainly not Crimea, but also not parts of the Donbass. It's just not going to happen. Once upon a time, both European leaders and the European people were willing to fight to the last Ukrainian. Now, only the European leadership class is willing to fight to the last Ukrainian. The European people, German polling data is quite clear on this, are willing to take the bait, if I can put it that way, to continue with the trap analogy, are willing to take the bait offered by President Putin, some kind of ceasefire, if not permanent peace. That would reduce all kinds of pressures on Europe, financial, geopolitical, and otherwise. Her concern, the EU foreign equivalent of foreign minister, her concern is that this is in fact a trap, that if European people, and indirectly then the European leadership, are gulled into this, accept the bait, take the bait, that the trap will be that Russia gets what it wants, which is full control of these 4 oblasts, that it will reward aggression, which is a violation of a profound international relations principle, and that it will, and this has been under discussed, I think, it will bypass the ring of fortifications, both fortified cities and other fortifications that Ukraine has put in place. They'll be completely bypassed. And the territory beyond that ring of fortifications lends itself to the kinds of warfare that Russians like to prosecute. So it really would hamstring, on an operational level, hamstring Ukraine. But here's what makes it a trap: the bait is very attractive to the European population at large, and they're putting pressure on their leadership class. And I think they're going to take the bait. Whether the trap is actually as bad as some people make it out to be, that remains to be seen. In the literature, and I'll end on this note, in the literature, some people liken what's going on in Ukraine to what went on in Korea in the 1950s. And I would remind your viewers that that conflict came to an end in the form of a ceasefire, a temporary ceasefire, that has now lasted for 70 plus years. There's no peace treaty. The United States is still technically at war with North Korea, but there has been a ceasefire.
Kill the radio!
There has been a ceasefire that people at the time thought was going to be quite temporary, and that was giving in to aggression on the part of North Korea, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There has been a kind of peace on that peninsula now for almost a century, certainly 70 plus years. If Ukraine could pull that off in the context of this conflict, that might be the least bad outcome for Kyiv.
Yes, Andrew Latham, thank you very much for joining us. Apologies to our viewers for the technical issues there. We now move on. We stay in Europe, where Polish citizens are flocking to military training amid Russian aggression fears. This comes after Poland downed Russian drones in its airspace this week. It is the first time a NATO country fired during Russia's war in Ukraine. More than 20,000 volunteers have signed up so far this year, with expectations of 40,000 by the year's end. Many citizens are seeking training to prepare for potential conflict, strengthen national defences and support the country's reserve forces amid escalating tensions with Russia. Let's have a look at what some of the military trainees had to say.
W moim marzeniu zawsze było wstąpić do wojska, ale jakoś jak byłam młodsza, bo ja tutaj już jestem troszeczkę starsza niż wszyscy uczestnicy, no to jakoś tak miałam może trochę strach, a potem przyszło małżeństwo, dzieci. Wie pani co, no wiadomo, gdzieś z tyłu głowy jest, gdzieś tam człowiek to ma z tyłu i myśli o tym, że gdzieś tam może się coś wydarzyć, ale staram się żyć dniem dzisiejszym, to co tu i teraz i przygotować się po prostu do funkcjonowania w nowej rzeczywistości. Zawsze mówię, że zrobiłabym wszystko, żeby moje dziecko było bezpieczne i na pewno stanęłabym do walki, żeby on był bezpieczny, a resztę, żeby... No.
Mam tej rodziny, jestem najstarszym z trójki rodzeństwa, więc jest ta potrzeba taka jednak w razie potrzeby obrony tej rodziny i no jednak tak jak kiedyś nasi przodkowie bronili tych ziem, tak samo ja czuję się zobowiązany do kontynuowania tego, jeżeli by taka potrzeba nastąpiła.
Jak rozmawiam z kolegami, to dość spora ilość chce, aczkolwiek wydaje mi się, że to najmniej taki patriotyczny Polak ma w głębi zakorzenione w sercu, w duszy tą siłę jednoczenia się w razie potrzeby i to pokazuje historia tego naszego kraju oraz narodu całego.
Colonel Pawal Wonka says reserve training is vital, with strong reserves key to winning prolonged conflicts. Let's have a look at what the colonel had to say.
To jest jedno z głównych zadań dla jednostek czasu pokoju, żeby wyszkolić rezerwy. Że to nie jest coś, co jest czymś ekstra, dodatkowym albo często wręcz zbędnym, tylko to jest jedno z głównych zadań. Bo każdy konflikt pokazuje jedno. Konflikt wygrywają zawsze rezerwy, zwłaszcza długotrwały. Fakt powołania dwóch nowych dywizji nie wziął się znikąd. Natomiast samo założenie, że Polska samodzielnie jest w stanie się obronić, tak, jest to możliwe, bo widzimy przykład Ukrainy. Na pewno, tak jak powiedziałem, przy wsparciu sojuszniczym NATO konflikt prawdopodobnie byłby krótszy NATO lub Stanów Zjednoczonych, bo to też trzeba rozgraniczyć. Możemy liczyć na Amerykanów jako członka NATO, możemy też liczyć na nich jako partnera bilateralnego.
We stay in Europe, but we turn west, where protests are underway in central London, organised by controversial far-right figure Tommy Robinson under the title Unite the Kingdom. The demonstration seeks to mobilise supporters around a platform that combines strong anti-immigration rhetoric with claims of threats to free speech. The rally has invoked the recent killing of American conservative activist Charlie Kirk, using his death as a symbolic call to action. In a video message, Robinson urged followers to march for freedom for their children and for Charlie Kirk. A similar march took place in July of 2024, attracting thousands of participants. Today's demonstration includes a march across Westminster Bridge, followed by a rally near Downing Street. Far-right figures from across Europe and North America are also taking part. Among the expected speakers are French politician Eric Zemmour, Germany's AfD MP Peter Brijsten, British commentator Katie Hopkins, and Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson. We're now joined by David K. Johnson. He is an American author and professor of criminal justice, journalism, law and political science at Rochester Institute of Technology. Thank you very much, David, for joining us here and speaking on this topic. What does this tell us about the transatlantic spread of this far-right movement? And as we're seeing from these visuals, there are thousands and thousands of people marching in protest for this. And a high-profile but highly controversial figure like Tommy Robinson has organised this. What does it say about British society and the rise of the far-right across the pond?
Well, not just across the pond. I mean, we're seeing in the US, in the UK, and some other places, Germany, an effort to stir up racial or religious hatred, distrust, taking singular examples of some kind of crime and then applying them to an entire class or group of people. Because it's easy to do this. And basically we're undoing a great deal of what appeared to be progress on, as we call them in the United States, civil rights, which grow out of property rights. And in Europe and the UK, we call them human rights that grow out of the post-Nazi theory of human dignity. And we're going to see more of this. And we're also people are in many ways being very misled. Charlie Kirk, for example, often described in the news as a conservative. He was not. He was a promoter of hatred, misogyny, racism. He said there are people should be stoned to death, for example, simply for being who they are. Promoted all sorts of horrible rhetoric. He wasn't killed, as Donald Trump has tried to get people to believe, by some, as Trump would say, radical left lunatic. He was killed by someone from the far right. There's a schism going on in the far right between two of the biggest and most significant groups promoting racial, religious, and gendered hatred in the United States. And so a lot of this depends on stoking fears of people who do not have sophisticated ideas about things and can easily be manipulated. There's a reason Donald Trump at every rally says, "We love the poorly educated," because he can lie to them and get away with it. He can't do that with the educated classes.
Yes, and David, can you tell us a bit more about the far-right movement currently going on in Europe? Of course, this is in London, but speakers are from the European continent. We've also seen far-right governments pop up for the likes of Austria and some would say Italy and, of course, Hungary. What are your thoughts about the rise of the far-right in the European continent?
Well, I think we're seeing it's somewhat of a mixed bag. I mean, Marine Le Pen, the far-right French political leader, did not do well in the last elections. Now the French government is falling apart. So this is not a story of black and white. It's a much more subtle and complicated story. The number of people who are refugees, we have the highest level of refugees in world history right now as a share of the population, who have come into Europe and into the United States. Economic refugees, the people who get on overloaded boats and if they don't sink, come across the Mediterranean, the numbers of those people have set off alarms with people who don't embrace the idea of a multicultural, multiracial, multi-religious world. And I think that's what we're seeing. And I think we're also seeing sort of the end of the post-World War II order. Donald Trump has contributed mightily to this by going after allies and annoying them, much to the benefit of President Xi in China, who sees his country as the 21st century dominant force replacing the US. So by and large, the biggest part of this story is stoking old fears and the collapse of the post-World War II consensus.
Yes, David K. Johnson, do stay with us as we have further topics to discuss. We now move over to the United States, where the Trump administration has drafted a plan to deploy 1,000 Louisiana National Guard troops to assist law enforcement in cities like New Orleans and Baton Rouge, according to Pentagon documents reported by the Washington Post. This operation would support local authorities in high-crime neighborhoods with crime prevention, drug interdiction and logistical aid, potentially lasting until September 2026. The plan awaits approval from federal and state officials, including Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry. This move follows Trump's broader crackdown on crime, especially in Democratic-led cities, despite declining violent crime rates in many urban areas. Trump has previously sent federal troops to Washington, D.C., and indicated plans to deploy forces to other cities such as Chicago and New York. Last week, Trump also announced sending National Guard troops to Memphis to tackle crime. We're once again joined by David K. Johnson. David, what is Donald Trump trying to achieve here? We've just been told that statistics show that he's quite frequently deploying to these National Guard troops to places that actually have declining crime rates. Is he simply flexing his muscles over the establishment?
Donald is, in his own mind, our dictator. He's literally said that back on February 26th. And I've been warning people since 2011 that Donald believes he should be the global dictator. And he told the Atlantic magazine not long ago, "I run America and the whole world." The use of troops in this way is absolutely prohibited by something called the Posse Comitatus Act. You may not use American troops against American citizens, and you may not use them for domestic law enforcement. Legally, these troops can be used to protect federal buildings and other federal property, but they cannot be used for law enforcement. In Chicago, the governor, J.B. Pritzker, who is a possible Democratic presidential nominee in 3 years, has very clearly said we're not going to allow the federalization of Illinois National Guard troops or any regular military troops to engage in law enforcement. Now, how they're going to accomplish that is not clear, but he's been quite clear about it. But all of this is part of the effort by Donald to intimidate people, to basically assert if you don't bend the knee or at least sit back and go along, you will pay a price for this. And as a result, we've seen demonstrations all across America. Little towns like Appleton, Wisconsin, and big cities like Chicago, with people protesting these illegal, unconstitutional actions of the Trump administration.
Yes, David K. Johnson, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Pleasure to get your insight. We now move over to the Middle East, where Qatar says it will be hosting a summit of Arab and Muslim leaders on Monday to denounce recent Israeli attacks on Hamas officials in Doha. According to Qatar's foreign ministry spokesperson Majid al-Ansari, a resolution will be drafted in relation to the matter in a ministerial meeting on Sunday, which will then be discussed in the Monday summit meeting. The summit would reflect broad Arab and Islamic solidarity with the state of Qatar after its capital city Doha was hit by Israeli strikes on September the 9th, which killed 5 Hamas members and a Qatari security officer. This attack drew widespread international condemnation, including from Gulf monarchies allied with the United States. Among the leaders attending Monday's summit will be Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani. Turkish President Erdogan will also be in Doha, but his presence at the meeting is yet to be confirmed. Qatar hosts the largest US base in the Middle East region and is also actively playing a mediation role in the Gaza war alongside the United States and Egypt. Well, that is all that we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.